This is going to be part 2 of the series that I'm doing about how I, Stephen Bell, became the protagonist in a global social engineering program. But before we get into it, I just want to highlight the absolute outrageousness that is going on right now. Just imagine yourself in my shoes. Not only am I being held in complete isolation in an open air imprisonment since 2011, but anybody and everybody is being outright prohibited from having any kind of organic interactions with me whatsoever. And at any moment, my personal affairs, my life in general, could be misused and propagandized into oblivion. And as a relevant example of this, just look at how my sexual preferences, kinks and fetishes has become a focal point of their propaganda. Is this really the kind of society that we really want, where you are persecuted for your sexual preferences if the powers that be so desire? As I stated in part 1, called State-Sponsored Hate Crime, they had to turn everybody that I knew against me, including my family. This obviously didn't happen overnight, but was something that took place exponentially, at least a year or two before the fake real-life Truman Show really began. Because believe it or not, people have not always hated and despised me. In fact, throughout my life before the program, I have always had friends and people around me. I was even quite known in my area of Denmark as someone who could hold their own and fight. And as you know, I have had an extensive criminal past. I have been in prison several times for drugs, weapons and assault. And so people have always had a certain image and perception of me, which is obviously not very complimentary, to use a big word, for the state's agenda in proclaiming publicly, without any actual paperwork or court cases, that I was some kind of pedophile sex criminal, which I'm obviously not. So they needed desperately to change people's perception and image of me from what they saw me as. And this is where my very adventurous sex life with my ex called Naja really comes into play. As I mentioned last, we had a very turbulent relationship that went really bad within a year or so, and for the life of me, I don't know why I stayed with this girl, because it's not like I didn't get the warning signs and whatnot. I just totally ignored them time and again. And in hindsight, of course, I now know that it was the program, an actual non-consensual illegal human experimentation with neurological and directed energy weapons used by the intelligence agencies to alter and manipulate me, Stephen Bell, without me actually knowing it. Something we now know has been going on for decades, a continuation of MK Ultra, one might say. So what the intelligence agency PET did around 2007, they began to communicate to my ex-girlfriend through the synthetic telepathy communication system, the same exact system that they are using now to communicate to everybody who find themselves within a certain proximity to me. And they didn't just communicate to her either, they also used the directed energy weapons to cause her physiological effects. I remember quite vividly how she told me that she was losing some of her hair, and I imagine this is just one of many ways they used to coerce her to begin working for them. Which is something that did happen exponentially, especially as our relationship grew more and more turbulent, insanely problematic over time in fact. However, our sex lives, to the contrary, became more and more adventurous. And I would venture to guess this has a lot to do with the intelligence agency's directives to her, because she suddenly started to introduce more and more out there fantasies, sex toys, and not least female porn into our sex lives, which was outside of what I knew she was into, and we had been together for about a year. So I was quite hesitant, especially to the female porn, which ironically I found to be gay, but evidently something that I have come to like too. Typically we would go to cocktail bars for a few hours to get loaded, and of course do a few grams of coke. Then we would go home and have these sex sessions lasting hours, completely coked out of our minds, while obviously having amazing sex. And there really isn't anything quite like cocaine and sex. I'm sure many of you know this. However, the point of the story is not how great everything was, because simultaneously with all the good and adventurous times, she would be telling everybody behind my back what we were getting up to, and probably more than just the facts too. And you have to remember, in those days, people in Denmark were not particularly open-minded as people are today. So shemale porn and a man using sex toys, despite it being with his girlfriend, was considered gay by the majority. So people's image and perception of me changed drastically as per design. And obviously my standing was challenged more and more by people who wanted what I had, meaning the drugs and money. And while I did a stint in jail for 3 months in late 2007 is when I finally began to open my eyes for her betrayal, obviously without knowing the extent to it. So shortly after we moved apart and immediately my life took a turn for the better, I began to regain some of what I had lost, but it was short-lived and the word was out that I could be taken advantage of, and more than that, she came crawling back, and stupidly enough, despite all that I had been through with this bitch, I took her back. And the only purpose why she wanted to get back together again was so that she could sabotage me and what I had in the works at that point in time. Not only would she use the same old tricks, she or they took things to a completely different level. I mean, holy moly, the things that she wanted to do, and the outrageous things that they would say to others. Needless to say, the rekindled relationship did not last very long at all. She is or was so insane, she would not let any other women have any contact with me. She would literally threaten them, and often she would turn up where I was just to start a fight. For example, in a bar, because she had heard that I was with other people, and she would pick a fight and hit me over the head with a bottle out of nowhere for no reason whatsoever. Or another example was New Year's Eve 2009, where she called me up to say that she had been arrested and wanted me to come to her flat. And when I arrived early in the morning, New Year's Eve, she had all these younger guys sitting around, probably hoping that that would set me off in some kind of jealousy. And when that didn't work, she fucking stabbed me in the leg. So there really wasn't any limit to what she was capable of. The power and support that she had clearly gotten to her head. She thought she was invincible, not only because of my fatal mistakes of teaching her about the drug game, fighting and whatnot, but also the protection that she had from the intelligence agency, and not least her relation to a 1% motorcycle club, which, by the way, she was doing everything to turn against me. So when the intelligence agencies of this global social engineering program have been broadcasting propaganda campaigns about the domestic disputes we have had, it is true to some extent, but of course they're leaving out all the fucking context. Everybody in Aalborg, including the police, knew about her completely crazy tendencies and abilities to go on crazy rampages. So yes, I have responded in kind with a few slaps here and there. Not that I'm proud of it, but I sure as shit have no quarrels with it either. In light of what I've been subjected to, both physically and mentally, by a disturbed and violent woman working for the intelligence agencies, doing everything in their power to have me destroyed and probably even killed. This has been an accurate account of the story of how the intelligence agencies used a disturbed young woman as a de facto agent provocateur against her boyfriend at the time. This is the primary factor that has given the intelligence agencies the ability to turn a somewhat known and respected person, aka me, in the criminal life into a protagonist to be used in a global social engineering program. And of course, it didn't end with Nadia either. There are a few more people that have been used in similar ways by the intelligence agencies, simultaneously with this story and afterwards, which we should get much more into in the next part of this video series.